Hi, and welcome to the show. Subscribe at kevinmd.com/podcast and get CME for this episode by clicking on the CME link in the show notes. Today, we welcome back Armin Feldman. He's a medical consultant to attorneys. Today's KevinMD article is titled Bridging Attorneys and Doctors, the Role of Medical Legal Consultants. Armin, welcome back to the show.
Hi, Kevin. Nice to see you again.
So Armin's been on multiple times. Go to kevinmd.com/podcast, upper right-hand corner search bar. Look for his name and hear his story. But today, let's go right into your most recent article, Bridging Attorneys and Doctors, the Role of Medical Legal Consultants. How did this article come together?
Well, I wanted to give your doctor reader something somewhat a little different. So, as you know, I do medical legal consulting. I've been doing it for the last 16 years after starting this new field of forensic medicine. And some of the typical things we do, for example, is to write comprehensive medical summary reports that attorneys use as part of settlement demand letters. We write reports that answer specific medical questions, helping attorneys to prove up medical theories for cases. But this one is a little different. So I wrote the article about medical legal consultants working as a liaison for the attorney that's hired them. And so typically what we're doing when we do this is that the attorney wants us to meet with a treating doctor that's involved in the injuries of the attorney's case. And it's actually kind of hard for attorneys to get to talk with the treating doctors. First of all, they're all busy. A lot of them don't want to pick up the phone when they know that an attorney calls. They think they may be dragged into some litigation that they don't want to participate in. And so I developed this service where we as medical legal consultants, and in this case particularly that I was asked to meet with a treating doctor to see if they were going to be on board with the attorney's theory for traumatic causation in the case. So this was a typical bread and butter case where the client was rear-ended in an accident. Right after the accident, the client had the onset of low back pain. It was radiating down his left leg. It wasn't getting better. So subsequently, an MRI was done, and he had a disc protrusion at L4-5. And so the attorney asked me to write an opinion letter regarding, was this related to the accident? So I did do that, and it was my opinion to a reasonable degree of medical probability that the accident was the immediate proximate cause of the client's problems. And that was after talking to the attorney, reading the medical records, interviewing the client of the attorney, and doing whatever medical research I needed to do. So this, in the areas of law in which I consult, probably 9 out of 10 cases settle. So the attorney was trying to settle this case, and he was getting close to submitting a settlement demand letter. And he thought it would be a good thing if the treating doctor, in this case, treating that low back pain, also wrote an opinion letter, but he wasn't certain if that treating doctor was even in agreement with our opinion that it was the accident that caused the problem. So he asked me to meet with the treating doctor. So I called the treating doctor and I explained that I'm working with this attorney and I do this routinely. And the attorney asked me to call you and see if I could make an appointment to see you. We wanted to talk about your patient, Mr. So-and-so, and to specifically talk about his low back pain and the cause of that. So I set up the appointment to meet at the physician's office. The attorney paid the physician for the time, and then we discussed the case. And sometimes, the physician and I will go back and forth. But in this case, the physician also agreed that the back pain was related to the accident. The hooker in the case was that this client had an episode of low back pain sometime in the past. He sought medical treatment for it. And so the attorney that hired me was concerned, well, opposing counsel is going to say it's just a pre-existing condition. Well, By the way, something you may know is that about 50% of all Americans sometime in their life will seek out medical treatment for a low back problem. And in most of those cases, it's a single event,
Sure.
and it never comes back as a chronic problem, which was the situation in this case. So the attorney wanted to make sure that the treating doctor also thought it wasn't a pre-existing condition, it was related to the auto crash. And so we discussed it. He agreed that he thought that was the case as well. And so after I met with the physician, then the attorney called him and said, can you write an opinion letter stating that you thought that the auto crash was the cause of this?
And it goes to show that in general, physicians are more comfortable talking to other physicians, right?
Yes, absolutely. And, the attorneys that I work with, they're confronted with medical issues in every case, right? And so they know some medicine, but they aren't doctors. They didn't go to medical school. Sometimes they get the terminology wrong or pronounce the words wrong or don't have a good idea of the physiology or whatever. And it certainly helps the attorney, the case, and ultimately the injured person when a physician meets doctor to doctor with a treating doctor or a professional, an agency or social services or physical therapy, whatever it is.
Now, when you talk to these doctors, do you do it both from the plaintiff and defendant side?
Yeah, that's a good question. And the interesting thing about that is, well, first of all, I only work on the side of injured people. I have my own issues with working on the insurance side. It's something that I don't want to do. But the interesting thing is, even if you wanted to work on both sides, the system will determine where you work. So it turns out that attorneys know about what I do with regard to medical legal consulting, and it's plaintiff and claimant attorneys that are interested in my services. Defense attorneys really aren't interested in my services. Their go-to doctors are doctors that primarily always work on the insurance side.
Now, when you talk to doctors and you say you're representing or working on behalf of an attorney or some type of legal counsel, are these doctors a little bit apprehensive or is it a more collegial conversation?
They are at first, but when I speak with them on the phone to set up the appointment, I let them know, look, I'm not there to look over your shoulder, criticize what you've done, argue with you about your diagnosis or treatment. I'm just acting as a liaison to help this attorney try to optimally help their client. And once they realize that I'm not there in a confrontive way, they are happy to meet with me. They're cordial. These meetings always tend to go well, even if they don't agree with the attorney or my opinion.
How common is it for attorneys to use physician liaisons like yourself?
Yeah, it's not that common. So the the way that this works is if the attorney knows about the kind of medical legal consulting that I do, and I've trained over 1,600 physicians around the country to do this, or other physicians that are doing this around the country, if they've already been educated as to what it is that we do and what we provide, then it becomes a common service. But out in the rest of the world, for attorneys that don't know about these services, they don't use physicians in a liaison way.
So when I talk to other physicians, one of the biggest fears they have is being dragged into some type of legal case or being dragged into a deposition.
Right.
Does interacting with a physician liaison like yourself, would it decrease the incidences of them directly testifying in some type of deposition or court hearing?
Yes. Again, that's a great question. So the answer is yes. And here's how. So because most of these cases are settled and maybe one or two out of 10 will go to trial, the purpose, almost always, the purpose in my meeting as a liaison from the attorney to the doctor is to clarify something that will help the case to have a much higher percentage of settling. So by my meeting with the doctor, the likelihood that the case is going to go to trial, that they'll be in a deposition or asked to be an expert at trial lessens. So, and I let them know that, and that makes them more inclined actually to meet with me.
One of the things that you said earlier was how busy physicians are, and scheduling an appointment, even though it's paid by the law firm, sometimes is very difficult. I get this question a lot, actually. What
Mhm.
rates do physicians typically charge, or what rates are typically compensated to these physicians who accept appointments from attorneys or physician liaisons?
It's a good question, but the answer is it really varies. There's no standard rate for this. That first of all, I'm not involved in that
Sure.
negotiation, but the feedback that I get from attorneys is every doctor has a different rate. So, and it kind of varies per specialty. So if I'm going to meet with a neurosurgeon, who knows what that's going to cost? If I'm going to meet with, no knock on family
Yeah.
physicians, but if I'm going to meet with a family medicine doctor, that rate's less.
And if a physician just simply says no or doesn't want to meet with anything to do with attorneys or their liaisons, do you simply take that at face value? What do you do to try to get a conversation or interaction with a physician?
Yeah, it depends on what kind of physician, but if that's a treating doctor, one of the doctors that's treating one of the injuries from that attorney's client, we're not going to argue with them, right? Because the attorney has to have as good a relationship with the treating doctors as possible. If it's something outside of a treating doctor and it's important to the attorney, I might press that doctor a little bit more to meet with me.
Now, speaking from the other end, if physicians are interested in becoming liaisons between attorneys and other doctors, what kind of medical background should they have?
Yes. So the great thing about being a medical legal consultant is it really doesn't matter what your specialty is. As you know, I answer questions that any kind of medical question that comes up in a case. And the reason that I'm able to do that is these aren't cases that are going to trial. And even if they wind up going to trial, if I write a report for that case, both sides are going to stipulate that I'm not an expert in everything and they'll both get their experts. But for the purpose of negotiating and settling the case, what the attorney that hires me needs is medical opinions, well thought out, well reasoned, backed up by evidence from the literature. So every time I'm rendering medical opinions for the attorneys that hire me, I'm also doing the medical research so I can back up my opinions with evidence from the literature.
Now, do these physicians interested in becoming medical legal consultants, what kind of legal training should they have in order for them to feel comfortable doing this role?
Right. So the there are things in the legal system that they absolutely need to know, but that would be incorporated in their training to become a medical legal consultant, like the kind of training that I do. And so let me give you a real simple example. By the way, one of the things that I say to physicians that I treat, since I was the first one doing this, is most of the things that I'm teaching you are from mistakes that I
Yeah.
made early on when I was doing it. So a simple thing would be you never, ever, ever want to put anything related to the case, the strategy, what the client said, and so forth in an email to the attorney. Because if that case eventually gets filed and is set up for a trial, then everything is discoverable, right? So one legal thing that the doctors need to go and that I teach is if you need to say something important to the attorney, here's what your email should say. Please call me.
Mhm.
Right.
We're talking to Armin Feldman. He's a medical consultant to attorneys. Today's Kevin MD article is titled Bridging Attorneys and Doctors, the Role of Medical Legal Consultants. Armin, let's end off with some of your take home messages that you want to leave with the Kevin MD audience.
So I think here's one of the most important take home messages. Of course, in this day and age, with doctors being employees, they're employees of big corporations or hospital systems. One of the biggest trends in medicine is for physicians to have a side gig, right? So if a physician is, and it helps with alleviating burnout too,
Yeah.
but if a physician is looking for a great side gig, where they want to do some non-clinical consulting, but they really want to help people. One of the great things is we get to help these injured people. And so if they want something that's interesting, fun, actually lucrative, where they get to learn a lot of medicine, but a lot of different things, this would be certainly something for them to look into.
Armin, once again, thank you so much for sharing your time and insight. And thanks again for coming back on the show.
It was a pleasure. Nice to see you.